This is William Michael, the headmaster of the Classical Liberal Arts Academy, and this is the first hour of our study in freshman history. In our freshman year of history studies in the Academy High School program, we're going to study ancient history. Ancient history. In this first hour, I'd like to get started in this study by talking about the goals of the study of history and raising some important questions that we hope to answer as we study ancient history. In the Academy High School program, in our freshman year, we'll study ancient history. In our sophomore year, we'll study classical Greek and Roman history. Then in the junior year, we'll study medieval or European history. And in our senior year, we'll study American or modern history. So in freshman history, we'll focus on the ancient world and we'll simply follow the history through the years, leaving students as they finish their high school studies in the present, hopefully with a clear knowledge of the past. In this first lesson, as I said, we'd like to ask some questions. The study of history is very important, obviously. It's impossible for us to know where we are in time, in history, if we don't know where we've come from. It's impossible for us to know who we are or what we are if we don't know where we came from or how we got here. The Roman philosopher Cicero said that if a man does not learn what happened before he was born, he remains forever a child. If a man doesn't learn what happened before he was born, he remains forever a child. And so this question of where did we come from? When did human life begin? Where did human life begin? What's happened over the past 100 years, 1,000 years, 3,000 years, 10,000 years, million years? Has the world even existed? 1,000,000 years? 1,000,000,000 years? 10,000 years? How do we answer these important questions? Well, we try to answer them by the study of history, by simply going back and trying to learn what happened in the past. What is the history of human life on Earth? What is the history of the Earth itself? These are difficult questions, and before we even get into the studies, we have to ask questions like, how can we find out what happened in the past? What are our sources? How can we get information? Where can we get information? How can we learn about what happened hundreds of years ago or thousands of years ago? And if someone tells us that something happened, how can we tell if they're true? How can we test what people say about human history? How can we know for sure the history of human life on Earth? Or how can we know with certainty the history of the world? Can we know with certainty the history of the world? These are important questions that we always want to be thinking about. And remember, You always have a right to ask for proof. Any time that someone says this or that is true, you have the right to ask for proof. And if someone does have evidence to support what they say is true or false, they should be able to share it with you. So remember, it's never wrong to ask for proof. And that's going to be one of the real challenges that we have when we study history. Not only do we want to learn what other men and historians say about world history, but we want to find out if what they say is true or not. And how are we going to do that? That's going to be one of the challenges that we're going to face as we study world history. In this first lesson, we're going to walk through a chapter from a great history book, the Cambridge ancient history textbook published by Cambridge University, which is one of the best universities in the entire world. We're going to ask some questions about the earliest human life on Earth, what we call primitive man, or the first man. Where did the first men live? Where did the first man come from? How can we prove our answers to these questions? These are some of the issues we want to talk about in this first lesson, and we're going to continue to talk about these lessons all through our study of world history, all 4 years of high school, starting here in the beginning, talking about primitive man. Primitive man. Let's walk through this lesson. It's a very long lesson. I encourage you to try to read through the lesson, but I'm not sure that you're going to have time to read through all of it. But if you can, that would be great. I encourage you, if you're going to read, rather than spending time reading silly books or fiction and story books and things like that, learn to read history. It's a good use of your time just to read through world history lessons and learn little by little the history of the world. Let's get started with our first lesson, chapter 1 in our history book on primitive man. The text begins, history, in its common and more popular sense, when we talk about history, is the study of men's dealings with other men. Usually, when we talk about history, we're talking about the history of men, and we're interested in how different human beings lived and worked with one another. We want to know about man's dealings with other men. We want to understand how different groups worked together, especially when we see how different people are in the world. How did people in ancient times work together? But there's a larger sense in which human history merges in natural history. And what that means is we not only study the activities of people on earth, but we study the history of the earth itself. If we're able to know or learn certain things about the history of the earth itself, this will help us to understand the life of the most ancient men. For example, if we look in Africa today at the Sahara Desert, we can see that there's a giant, hot, dry desert, and no men can live in a desert. If we look somewhere else, we may see green, fertile fields with plenty of fresh water and good temperatures. And we can see that human life does very well in such a climate. Well, if we could see that through history, the conditions on earth changed, we could also make a good guess as to how human beings lived during those changes, how those changes on earth affected human life. And that can help us to reason and draw some conclusions about what men might have been doing during those ancient times. So the study of human history and the study of natural history, or the study of the physical world, become one and the same study. Our science studies and our history studies are related to each other. Our knowledge of the world itself, the earth, and the knowledge of man go together. The reason why this study of the earth and its relation to human history is so important is because if we were to ask what is the best source of knowledge about human history, what is the best way for us to learn about the history of men's dealings with other men, we would say it's by writings that have been left behind by ancient men. If we can look at the writings of different groups of people, especially when they write and communicate with one another, we can use their writings to know exactly what's going on, what they're thinking, what they're doing, what different groups are doing, and so on. The knowledge of human history can best be learned through the study of human writings. And the study of human writings is what we mean when we talk about history. When we talk about history, we are talking about the study of the life of men in the past using the writings of those men as our primary or main sources for our knowledge of world history. But what's interesting is that when we look at the writings of men, they don't go back very far. They go back around 3,500 years before the birth of Jesus Christ. 3,500 years before the birth of Christ. That's as far back as human writings go. That's about 5,500 years of human history from today back 2,000 years to the birth of Christ, and then back another 3,500 years, making a total of 5,500 years from today back to the earliest human writings. Before 3,500 BC, we have no more written evidence of human history. Now, just because we don't have writings doesn't mean we can't use reason and other evidence to try and figure out what happened. Human writings are one source of historical knowledge, and we could say the best source. But like I said, they only go back to 3,500 BC. What do we want to do, or what do we need to do if we want to learn about human history, but we don't have any human writings? Well, another source of knowledge about human history is the study of things that human beings leave behind, the study of the actual possessions, the actual physical remains of different groups of people that we can look at and find and then try to understand in light of what we already know. The collection of things left behind by human beings is called archaeology. Archaeology is the study of things left behind by human beings in history. What an archaeologist does is simply go to a place and look for signs of past life. Sometimes those signs may be right on the surface of the ground. They may still be in active use. If you look at the city of Rome, you'll see many ancient buildings, ancient roads, and so on that are still visible. These are products left behind by ancient people. We can study these buildings and roads and statues, houses, tools, jewelry, all different products that they've left behind. And we can study these things and learn more about ancient peoples. Sometimes archaeologists have to dig down into the earth to discover things that have been buried over time. Some archaeologists look for remains in the bottom of seas and oceans and lakes. Maybe a ship wrecked at one time and took a whole ship full of goods down to the bottom of the sea. Some archaeologists search the seas for signs of human history. But most of the time, archaeologists dig up the earth as ancient cities are covered up or as modern people build on top of old cities. The old places need to be uncovered. They need to be dug out and examined. And this is the work of archaeologists. Archaeologists have dug up entire towns and cities. Famous cities like the ancient city of Troy, buildings throughout ancient Rome and Greece and ancient Egypt and Israel have been dug up by archaeologists so that we can see what's been left behind and use it to help us understand human history when we don't have human writings, or to simply give us more information to combine with the human writings to understand human history as well as we can. So the two most important sources of knowledge of history, the two most important sources are human writings and what can be uncovered through archaeology. Human writings and human remains. Human writings and the things uncovered by archaeology. Once we run out of information from human writings in archaeology, that's where this question of the study of the earth itself comes in. But all knowledge or all thoughts about human life before 3500 BC, all of our knowledge of the past that goes back beyond human writings is not called history. It's called prehistory. It's important to understand that when we use the word history, we mean our knowledge of the past that is learned through human writings and human remains. Anything that we suggest happened before our human records, before human writings, before human remains is not called history. It's called prehistory. The reason why it's called prehistory is because it's really just theory. We really don't know anything for certain that happened before the human records that we have. In fact, maybe nothing happened before the human records that we have. The knowledge of what happened before human records is called prehistory. So anytime we talk about events in the past from before 3,500 BC, we're no longer talking about history. We're talking about prehistory because that information is theory. It cannot be proven to be true. It's theory. It's an attempt to explain what might have happened based on what we know about the past. So make sure you keep this clear. The knowledge of the human past based on human writings and human remains or human products left behind is called history. But the study of theories or the proposing of theories about what happened before human records is called prehistory. In this first chapter of our ancient history book, we're simply discussing prehistory. And like I said, this is all theory. If we go back as far as we can, studying human writings and human remains or human relics, we can know things back to a certain point, but we still haven't answered some of the bigger questions. We still haven't answered the questions of where did man come from? When did man begin to live in the world? Maybe man didn't begin writing as soon as he began to live on the earth. Maybe there were great catastrophes or destructions on earth that wiped out all of the things that men had made and written before 3,500 BC, or maybe man didn't live on earth before 3,500 BC. So you can see how these are very important questions. Were past civilizations destroyed on earth and buried, washed away forever? Or is the history that we can see in human writings all that there ever was? These are the questions that we have to try to answer, and scientists and archaeologists and historians, they spend a lot of time proposing theories about what might have happened before 3,500 BC. Now, what's interesting, many modern students and teachers believe that the world is billions of years old and that men have possibly lived for millions of years. Many people say that and believe that today. They have no way to prove that that's true, but many people accept theories that say that men have lived on earth for millions of years. Again, there's no way for them to prove that. It's simply a theory. But many people believe that theory. However, I'd like to challenge you to do something. I'd like to give you an interesting little challenge. I'd like you to try to find a copy of an old Catholic Bible, an old Douay-Rheims Catholic Bible. If you look in an old Catholic Bible, you'll see that in Genesis chapter 1, the very beginning of the Bible, where we read the story of creation when God created the heavens and the earth and the first men, we'll see that in the Catholic Bible, a date is written that marks the time of the creation of the world. And the date that's written in the Catholic Bible is 4000 BC. 4000 BC. So while it's common today for people to talk about the world being millions of years old, or talking about men living for millions of years, remember that it wasn't very long ago when it was normal for Catholics to think that the world was only 6,000 years old, that the world was created in 4000 BC. And remember why that date would be given and why that would make sense. We have no record of human life before 4000 BC. So the date that we find in traditional Catholic ideas about the time when the world was created agrees with what we see in real history of what's available in human writings. Remember that anytime you hear people talking about tens of thousands of years or hundreds of thousands of years or millions of years, it's just theory. There's no way for anyone to prove that men lived on earth millions of years ago. Maybe sometime we can talk about where people come up with those dates, those times of millions of years. But we don't have time for that right now in this lesson. So remember that when we talk about history, we're talking about the knowledge of human life that comes from human writings and human remains. And that history goes back only to 3,500 or 4,000 years before the time of Christ. Anything beyond that, any talk of greater numbers of years, is theory. That doesn't mean that it's false, but we simply have to make a note that anything that's speaking of tens of thousands or millions of years is a theory of human history, and we call that prehistory. Prehistory, the time before known human history. Now, one of the reasons why men propose these theories of millions of years of life on Earth is quite simple. If you look at a globe or a map of the world, if you look at the shapes of the continents on the Earth, if you look at the shapes of the big bodies of land on the Earth, they almost look like puzzle pieces. It looks like if you could slide the large bodies of land together, that they would fit together like puzzle pieces. The world almost looks like a puzzle with water in between the puzzle pieces. And some people, seeing this puzzle-like shape of the different parts of the world, the different bodies of land on Earth, propose a theory that at some time in the past, all of these bodies of land were actually joined together, and that something caused them to separate. And that's why they're separated with water in between the different bodies of lands, but the bodies of lands look like they might fit together like puzzle pieces. And so this simple appearance of the different parts of land that you can see on a globe or on a map led to men proposing a theory that there was a time long, long ago when these pieces of land were all joined together. Again, this is a theory. There's no way to prove this. It's simply a theory of what might have happened on Earth before human records, before history. This is prehistoric. Now, another source of information, another reason why people like to think about the origin of the world is because if we look at different groups of people, we can see that there are different races of people. If we look at Chinese people and Japanese people, we can see that they have a similar appearance. And if we look at African people, we can see that they have a very different appearance from Asian people. And yet, if we move around through Africa, we find that most of the people in Africa, even though they differ in some ways, they're similar, black-skinned and other characteristics that mark African people. And then to the north and to the west, we find white-skinned people. And so if we look at the races of men on the earth, we see that there appear to be three primary races of human beings, three main groups of human beings based on their physical appearance. In the East, we see what were called Mongoloid people. They're described as yellow-skinned and round-faced with straight, dark hair. These were called the Mongoloid people, and they refer to Asian peoples who are similar in appearance. The African people were referred to as Negroid people. The word negro simply means black, black-skinned people. And they were identified mainly by their shorter, curly hair and black skin. And then to the north, there were white-skinned or Caucasoid or Caucasian people to the north and to the west. And so some people looking at these three primary races of human beings think that that may be a source of information about how the world began. And so the first source of these theories is the shape of the bodies of land on Earth and how they appear to be pieces of a puzzle that could be squeezed together to form one body of land. Another source is the different races. Even though there are many different peoples and many different varieties of people's appearances today, it could be argued that all of the people who exist today have come from combinations of the three main races that existed in ancient times. So these observations have led historians to propose theories about the origin of the world. And when you go to college, if you study at a university, if you read books about ancient history, you'll find this theory of the ancient world to be very, very popular today. Again, I'm not saying that it's true because it needs to be proven. It's only a theory, but it's very popular. It's taught in schools, and in many schools, it's taught, and teachers don't make it clear that it's simply a theory. They present it as if it's proven fact, and it's not proven fact. It's simply a theory that historians use to try to explain history of the world before human writings and human remains that archaeologists can look at. So the idea is that all of the lands of the earth in prehistoric times were joined together. If you look at a map today, if you look to the north of what we call Africa and to the south of what we call Europe, there's a large sea that's called the Mediterranean Sea. This prehistoric theory of the world says that the bodies of land were close together like puzzle parts, but the Mediterranean Sea was actually a giant ocean that spread across the earth from west to east. And this giant ocean they called Tethys. 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 So the Mediterranean Sea, they say, was much, much larger in prehistoric times than it is today. There was land to the north of Tethys. There was land to the east of Tethys. And there was land to the south of Tethys. Three great bodies of land in the prehistoric world. And they say that from these three prehistoric lands, the three races of men developed. The Caucasians, or white-skinned people in the land to the north of Tethys, the Mongoloid, or yellow-skinned people to the east of Tethys, and the African, or Negroid people to the south of Tethys. And so you can see how these observations could lead to a reasonable theory about life before human records, prehistoric life. So the simple lesson that I'd like you to learn as we get started in the study of history is that records go back to 4000 BC, which is a traditional Christian date of the creation of the world. Ideas about prehistoric history, human life before 4000 BC is all based on theories, but these theories have some reasoning. The shapes of the continents and how they look like they might fit together, the three, what appear to be three main races of human beings, lead historians who don't necessarily hold the traditional Christian view of human history to propose an idea of three great bodies of land separated by a giant sea called Tethys in the prehistoric world. Now, these scientists, the way that the scientific method works is that scientists look at evidence that they have, they look at information that's available, and they propose theories, and they can propose any theory that they like. There's nothing wrong with proposing a theory. Sometimes these theories contradict Christian teaching, but they're only theories. And the Catholic Church normally says that scientists are free to propose theories, but theories need to be tested with the facts. And so, what scientists do is they take their theories and they then put those theories to the test as they go and basically check them out and search to see if they might be true. There's no evidence that this ancient prehistoric view of the world is true. It remains a theory, but as I said, it's a popular theory because basically everyone who's not a Christian, everyone who doesn't believe that the Bible contains a clear history of human life on earth starting around 4000 BC, holds this one popular theory about what life was like on earth before 4000 BC. And other popular ideas and theories come up as well, like whether dinosaurs existed on earth. Obviously, the Bible doesn't say anything about dinosaurs. If there were dinosaurs on earth, they would be pretty important. They'd probably be spoken about in the Bible if they were walking around on the earth. But we read nothing about dinosaurs in the Bible. We read nothing about God creating dinosaurs. And so we really can't make any certain statements about a topic like dinosaurs based on our study of the Bible. Some scientists and historians propose theories that dinosaurs existed and that some great catastrophe happened on Earth that killed the dinosaurs. And that's a theory, but we'd have reason to doubt that theory because if something happened on Earth that was so terrible that it wiped out all of the dinosaurs, why didn't it wipe out other species of animals? Why didn't it wipe out dogs and cats and cows and chickens and birds and so on? Why would it kill all of the dinosaurs but not all of the other animals? Why didn't it kill man? Man isn't very strong after all. So this theory of dinosaurs and prehistoric races, prehistoric lands, things like that, they're interesting theories to hear, listen to, think about, and so on. And many people hold them and take them seriously and are trying to search for proof that they might be true. But we have no proof that would lead us to say that they are true or that they're not true. They're just theories. And so they're interesting, and we shouldn't make too much of a fuss about them because, like I said, scientists are allowed to propose theories. It's how research and study gets started. But if we were to look at a source of Christian history like the Bible, which is inspired by God, we see no talk of prehistoric worlds. We see no talk of continents moving around on the earth. We see no talk of dinosaurs or prehistoric men. So we have to leave these ideas as theories and keep them separate from what we learn in sacred scripture, which is infallible since it's the Word of God. The first chapter of our history book goes into great detail talking about this theory of the prehistoric world and of these three great races of men living on earth. And then it talks about how at different times scientists and historians believe that the earth went through different periods where the weather changed. There were times where there was great cold weather and all of the waters of the earth froze and became glaciers, giant mountains of ice and snow. And then there were other times when the world got warmer and those glaciers, all of that ice and snow began to melt, and as it melted, that water flowed, and seas were formed, and bodies of water moved around, and bodies of land were reshaped, some covered with water, some left dry, and so the earth appeared different at different times as the weather changed. And when the weather changed, and as the earth and the water moved around the globe, human beings and animals would have had to move so that they could live comfortably. And all of this is part of this theory of the prehistoric world. Interesting to study, interesting to think about, but remember, just a theory, nothing to take too seriously until there's proof provided by the scientists and historians who talk about it. So to wrap up this first lesson, we've discussed a couple of important issues that are going to always be in our minds as we study the history of the world. First of all, we always have to remember that history is a most important study because we have to answer questions like, where did we come from? How did we get here? Where did man first live? How did we get to the place where we are today? We have to understand these questions, and we have to have some answers. Some of these answers are given to us by divine revelation, and we receive them by faith. Some answers, however, are not given to us in divine revelation, and we're left to seek these answers out by the use of reason and by our senses, by studying the earth and human history and trying to put together the story of human life on earth. We talked about the main sources of our knowledge of human history. We talked about how the best sources for us to study the history of the world are written records, human writings, and human remains, things studied and discovered by archaeologists. These are the two best sources, and really, the two of them together only take us back to around 3,500 years before Christ. So there's no evidence, no direct evidence, no human evidence of human life before 4,000 BC, which is what the traditional Christian view of the time of the creation of the world has always been. We then talked about how non-Christian people proposed theories that were not based on what we read in the Bible, but based on simple scientific theories about life continuing longer into history or deeper into history, further back in the past than 4000 BC. And we mentioned how this is called prehistory, that it's theoretical history. We talked about the idea of the prehistoric world that scientists and historians propose, a world where all of the continents were closer together, fit together like puzzle pieces, with one great ocean in the center of the land called Tethys. We talked about how these scientists proposed that there were three great races in the ancient or prehistoric world: the Mongoloid race in the east, the African race in the south, and the Caucasian race in the north, and how over time they theorized that these races mixed as they lived together and moved closer together or separated from one another, and that this mingling or mixing of the races produced all of the different races that we see today. So, interesting questions, interesting dilemmas for us to try and solve, important questions for us to answer, different sources where we can look for our information, different theories about what happened in the human past. We're going to study these things in detail through our 4 years of high school history studies. And here in this first lesson, we've introduced those questions and talked about prehistory. I hope that you find this lesson helpful. If you'd like to read more about this theory of the prehistoric world, I'm going to provide you with a chapter of text. It's very long. It's 50 pages. It's a lot of reading. If you're really interested in digging into this reading of history, I'd be happy to see you read through the text. I published an article titled How to Read History that gives you some instructions for how you can get through all of this reading in a good amount of time without taking too long. History reading can't be read like other kinds of reading. You have to learn to read quickly through history because there's so much to read. So if you'd like some help with that, look for my article, How to Read History. But I'll provide the lesson text, and you've got this lesson to guide you through this first hour of our study of freshman history. We'll go on through this course this year studying all of ancient history, that is, history before the time of the classical Greeks and Romans. We'll study the ancient world, the world of Israel and Egypt and the Babylonian Empire, the Persian Empire, some really interesting, wonderful history that we'll study, and we'll pay attention to these big questions as we go along, and we'll always remember to ask for proof and look for sources and evidence of what we claim to be true about human history. I hope you find this lesson helpful. If you have any questions, please get in touch with me anytime. I'd be happy to discuss these issues with you. God bless your studies.